You are listening.
You're listening.
You are listening.
You're listening
To a TVO Today.
To a TVO Today.
To a TVO Today. TVO Today
Podcast.
The following episode is about alleged homophobia and transphobia. It also mentions suicide. Please listen with care.
Previously on Queries.
So move an amendment to add to protected classes the following: bestiality, pedophilia or pedophilia, raping and then cannibalizing another person.
I just remember being enraged. I think we immediately got to work on writing the complaint.
His inability to let go and to continue to be litigious on this is a demonstration of how wrong-headed he actually is on this issue. That's my opinion.
In 2020, Toronto Catholic District School Board trustees voted to sanction one of their colleagues, Michael Del Grande. According to the board, Mike Del Grande breached the code of conduct when he used a slippery slope argument to speak out against codifying protections for queer and trans people.
It's worth noting that the board's initial decision was to exonerate Mike Del Grande for his slippery slope remarks on November 7th, 2019. But then, they reversed their decision and voted to sanction Mike Del Grande. The sanctions included that Del Grande make a public apology and that he complete equity training. But Mike Del Grande was not going to take the board's decision lying down. Quite the opposite. He took them to court.
He could have taken equity training, said he was sorry, and put the controversy to bed. Why didn't he do that?
I think the process really upset him because there's nothing in the process set out for there to be a reconsideration. And he thought it was very unfair and illegal for the board to do such a thing.
That's Charles Lugosi, Trustee Michael Del Grande's lawyer.
I just say I'm a problem solver. I'm stuck with sometimes some very difficult facts with some very unpopular clients. And I just do the best I can because I believe in a free and democratic society, and I think everyone deserves a chance for their day in court.
To get an interview with Trustee Del Grande, we reached out to him directly. We also reached out to his lawyer and the Toronto Catholic District School Board's communications team. Del Grande's lawyer, Charles Lugosi, agreed to speak to us on his client's behalf.
Mr. Del Grande is more than willing to speak. The thing is, Mr. Del Grande, his health has seriously deteriorated with all the stress. He authorized me to speak on his behalf, if need be, on any matter, and that's why I feel I'm at liberty to talk to you.
Lugosi emphasized that Mike Del Grande took the Toronto Catholic School Board to court out of principle. Lugosi says Trustee Del Grande didn't think it was fair or legal that the board could reconsider their decision after they'd already voted on it, originally voting not to sanction Del Grande and then reversing that decision.
I think the mental shock of all that was a lot for Mr. Del Grande to handle because he had a right to appeal that, and he did, and that's how we ended up in the courts. It's just struck me as this sounds like an abusive process.
But the courts found that the board did have the legal authority to change their mind. So they don't agree with Lugosi that Toronto Catholic is guilty of abusive process in this case. But Lugosi also made a more existential argument on behalf of his client.
What does that say for freedom of political belief in this country? That if you don't agree with, let's say, the governing party of the country, and you express an opposing point of view, does that mean that the government ought to send you away for political re-education?
Del Grande argues that when the Toronto Catholic School Board codified protections for queer and trans people in 2019, they contradicted Catholic doctrine. As his lawyer explains,
what was on the table in 2019 were a series of incremental protections, call them human rights, let's put it this way, that were incompatible with the Catholic faith.
And Mike Del Grande isn't the only one who says protections for queer and trans people contradicts Catholic doctrine. A whole organization takes this worldview even further, and they publicly stand with Mike Del Grande.
We don't have a lot of opportunities to award this to any of our politicians or elected officials, so we're very pleased to give this to Michael Del Grande today.
That audio is from a video clip of Jeff Gunnarsson. He's the president of a group called Campaign Life Coalition, or CLC. In the video, Gunnarsson is presenting an award to Trustee Del Grande for, quote, excellence in serving and protecting children.
So, what is Campaign Life Coalition?
And why are they supporting Mike Del Grande?
I'm Matt Nethersole.
And I'm Tiff.
This is Queries, Episode 2. I call it Evil.
My name is Josie Lutke. I'm the Director of Education and Advocacy for Campaign Life Coalition. We're active on all levels of government, so municipal, provincial, and federal.
Campaign Life Coalition's bio on X, formerly Twitter, reads, political arm of Canada's pro-life movement.
What does that mean? It means opposing things like abortion and euthanasia, things like IVF. And we're also a pro-family organization, so recently that has meant opposing the celebration of Pride Month, especially in schools, opposing the very radical sex ed curriculum. We see strong families as being necessary to protect life.
Campaign Life Coalition is also a Christian media outlet. They publish headlines like, ban child sex change in Canada, and does the LGBT pride flag now cover bestiality? For Campaign Life Coalition, supporting Trustee Del Grande was a matter of supporting the underdog.
I do know that he was very outspoken in his opposition, and that's controversial. And he got flack from many, many different sources. And so we appreciate when trustees are willing to take a stand knowing that it's going to be difficult and they're going to be persecuted for doing that.
Campaign Life Coalition says that Michael Del Grande was right to voice his concerns over the increasing acceptance of queer and trans people in Catholic schools.
They're actually doing a detriment to their students because we genuinely believe that, for instance, engaging in homosexual activity is sinful and that separates one from God. And so communicating to children that that's okay, it goes beyond communicating inclusion and acceptance, which we believe in, to actually leading them into harm's way.
But Maria Rizzo would beg to differ.
I am doing the work of Jesus. I don't know who they're doing the work for. My name is Maria Rizzo, and I am a school trustee for the Toronto Catholic District School Board and a very large part of North York.
Maria Rizzo has been a Catholic school trustee in Toronto for more than 20 years. She's familiar with Campaign Life Coalition.
They've personally attacked me, but, you know.
How so?
Well, I mean, they attacked me in their articles. They attacked me by, you know, having protests outside our building and petitions for me to resign.
We reached out to CLC about Maria Rizzo's allegations, and CLC said, "We strongly reject the characterization of these activities as an attack." Trustee Rizzo was at the meeting where Trustee Del Grande made his controversial remarks.
So move an amendment to add to protected classes the following: bestiality, pedophilia or pedophilia, raping and then cannibalizing another person.
Even though it's been several years, I actually don't think that it's less appalling today than it was then. And I don't think that the fallout has ended yet.
The fallout has been ongoing. Not only did Trustee Del Grande take Toronto Catholic to court to appeal his colleagues' sanctions against him, but members of the community flagged Trustee Del Grande's remarks to the Ontario College of Teachers as well. That's the regulatory body for educators in the province. Legal counsel for the Ontario College of Teachers argues that Mike Del Grande used inflammatory and disrespectful language in his remarks on November 7th, 2019, and that amounted to conduct unbecoming for a teacher. Here's Charles Lugosi, his lawyer, on that.
If he's working as a politician, he's working as an elected representative to advance the views of his constituents and to defend the Catholic faith, how can that possibly be conduct unbecoming if he's just doing his job to engage in political debate?
At the time of this recording, the Ontario College of Teachers has yet to release a decision for this hearing.
Campaign Life Coalition has been following Mike Del Grande's legal battles closely. In fact, the organization has been supporting Trustee Del Grande through a fundraiser for his legal fees and have posted regular updates there. A website called Life Funder currently hosts a campaign called Stand with Michael Del Grande. CLC's logo is displayed as the creator of the initiative. Category: Persecuted Christians. How much has this Life Funder raised now, Matt?
I've got it open on my laptop now, and it says more than 2,000 donors have raised almost $250,000. The goal is currently set at $275,000, and I'm actually going to read some of the messages here. One donation for $20 is accompanied with the message, "You are a true blessed warrior for the truth." Another donation here for $100 says, "Jesus is right beside you, and Mary has her mantle over you."
The way the fundraiser describes what Trustee Del Grande is going through, it's not surprising that it's moved so many people to act and open their wallets. It's very high-stakes rhetoric. Exhibit A, if the LGBT lobby succeeds in crushing Trustee Del Grande, it will set a precedent to persecute every other Christian in public office who dares to defend Christian moral teaching. That's a direct quote.
Another thing that's interesting about the Life Funder, the description says that the board is attempting to remove Del Grande from his position, but the board actually never tried to do that.
They applied sanctions, which they are empowered to do, according to the Education Act.
Again, Trustee Del Grande hasn't done any of those sanctions. He's fighting them in the courts.
A message from Michael, dated May 4th, 2021, in the Life Funder description reads, "Dear friends, it is becoming a war of attrition by escalating costs to deter me from fighting for Catholic values and morals in our schools." The message also mentions that Mike Del Grande's legal costs have already exceeded $100,000, and that was back in 2021. The message ends with real gravitas and urgency. Our side believes this is a precedent-setting case. Religious freedom, free speech, right of public debate. Silence is consent to Christian persecution.
Persecuted?
Maria Rizzo, Toronto Catholic School Board trustee, on that argument.
Well, it's just so much you can take with people believing that they are Jesus on the cross. I have no time for it.
Do you mean Trustee Del Grande feels he's Jesus on the cross in a way in this situation?
He feels like he's a victim.
And you don't feel he is a victim in this case?
I absolutely do not.
Could you conjecture as to why he feels he is a victim in this case?
He's got too much of an ego to think otherwise. He thinks he has done nothing wrong.
Mike Del Grande firmly disputes the allegation that he was comparing any of the terms he listed to gender identity, gender expression, marital status, and or family status.
Campaign Life Coalition doesn't think Michael Del Grande has done anything wrong either, and they see supporting Michael Del Grande as a way to further their message.
Would you say it's part of the CLC mission to have some form of impact on the Catholic School Board?
Yes. So Campaign Life Coalition, we're a Christian organization. We're not explicitly Catholic, but we do have a lot of involvement in the Catholic School Board because there is more room, I think, to be effective because the Catholic Church's teachings on these issues, on life issues, on family issues are very clear.
In fact, Campaign Life Coalition has explicitly approved of Mike Del Grande in more ways than one.
We've had him greenlit for a while.
Campaign Life Coalition runs a database for elected officials around the country. Anyone can search anybody at any level of government nationally, and CLC will tell you if they're pro-life and pro-family.
Yeah, okay, I'm seeing next to Trustee Del Grande's name and photo, there's a green stoplight, meaning CLC thinks he's supportable. Politicians are given an amber traffic light if CLC thinks voters should, quote, be cautious, and red means the candidate is unsupportable. CLC is not a fan of Maria Rizzo, for example.
I have a red stoplight on their website. I take that as a badge of honor.
Beyond just telling people who to vote for, CLC also works to influence politics at a grassroots level.
We do mobilize at every convention. We have a lot of grassroots supporters who are engaged politically, and so they'll show up. They'll show up to vote in nomination races. They'll show up to vote at the convention.
Are you running candidates yourself?
We don't run candidates, but we do try to identify people who are willing to run, to be able to train them on how to answer questions from the media, how to be effective at door knocking, and what groups that they should reach out to get support. So we definitely support candidates. When we do identify someone who is supportable, we'll green light them, and we'll encourage our supporters to volunteer for them and certainly to vote for them when the time comes.
In 2022, CBC News reported that at least 20 anti-trans candidates were running in school board elections. It cited CLC as one of the largest organizations involved in those elections.
And so as Ontario is seeing increased political organizing from the right, it's worth asking, when do these political platforms cross the line into hate?
In Canada, we have a piece of case law that's called the Hallmarks of Hate.
That's Hazel Woodrow. She's referencing a series of Canadian court decisions, including a decision from the Supreme Court of Canada that discuss hallmarks of hate speech.
Hazel is the education program manager with the Canadian Anti-Hate Network. It's a nonprofit organization made up of journalists, NGO heads, lawyers, researchers, and educators on hate groups and hate crimes.
I want to be really clear that I don't think that a legalistic perspective of hate is the best perspective to take, or the one that is actually going to help the most people. But I think that it helps for me to start there, because it allows me to communicate out of the gate that actually this isn't as much of a moving target as a lot of people would like to act like it is.
Hazel Woodrow has raised the alarm on Campaign Life Coalition before. For the Canadian Anti-Hate Network website, she's written pieces like there's an anti-LGBTQ+ and anti-abortion lobby group setting Conservative Party policy, and far-right attempts at lobbying school board into rejecting Pride flag end in failure.
So we can look at the Hallmarks of Hate, which is, like I said, a list of qualities that can be used to define what is hate speech. And the kinds of things that are on there are things like the targeted group is posed as a threat to children and the elderly and vulnerable populations, or the targeted group is compared to vermin and insects and animals.
Campaign Life Coalition has said they awarded Michael Del Grande for protecting kids. Here's a different part of the award video you heard earlier in the episode.
You took a stand. You voted against gender identity theory being added to the school board's code of conduct, and you led the charge against that because, for one reason, you care about the children.
That's Jack Fonseca, the CLC Director of Political Operations. The full name of the award they gave Trustee Del Grande, the Joseph P. Borowski Award for Excellence in Serving and Protecting Children.
In addition to protecting kids, other hallmarks of hate identified by Canadian courts include portraying a group as a powerful menace that is taking control of major institutions in society. The targeted group is also framed as depriving others of their livelihoods, safety, freedom of speech, and general well-being. And the messages convey the idea that members of the targeted group are devoid of any redeeming qualities and are innately evil.
According to the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, Campaign Life Coalition is a powerful influence in the Canadian far-right social conservative ecosystem. CLC has created other platforms to spread their message, one of which is called LifeSite News.
Shortly after Mike Del Grande made his controversial remarks, he published a column on LifeSite News. Here's an excerpt. Each one of us cannot simply take the comfort of the pew on a Sunday and say nothing or do nothing about the attacks on our faith taking place all around us. Father Dwight Longenecker put it best for me. First, we overlook evil. Then we permit evil. Then we legalize evil. Then we promote evil. Then we celebrate evil. Then we persecute those who still call it evil. I call it evil.
CLC told us by email they founded LifeSite News, but LifeSite is a separate organization now. Here's Hazel Woodrow from the Canadian Anti-Hate Network again.
Currently, Campaign Life Coalition and LifeSite News live in the same office in Hamilton.
Hazel says LifeSite News has acted as a space that publishes dog whistles. Dog whistles are a type of coded language that garners support, attention, and action against one group without alarming opposition.
Like, a big one is groomer, which is a dog whistle that is allegedly communicating concerns about children's safety or something like that.
We asked CLC about the allegations of dog whistling, and they said, "We aim to communicate truthfully, and as such, we will use some terms that the mainstream media does not." According to Hazel and researchers at the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, dog whistles create a climate in which it becomes acceptable to say horrible things about queer and trans people.
If a teacher has a student in their classroom who compares queerness to pedophilia and bestiality, obviously that needs discipline, but what about when the trustee just said it out loud last week? It becomes a lot harder for schools to keep a lid on really overt forms of hate when the hate is being spoken out loud by people in positions of power, and it creates a climate that is so antithetical to learning and to exactly what young people need in their schools.
With that in mind, I asked Michael Del Grande's lawyer, Charles Lugosi, whether his client's remarks came close to hate speech.
I don't think they come close at all. I mean, if you look at what he says, these areas ought to be protected by law and that people ought to be loved. They're all God's children anyway. So whether he said that in a facetious way or not, there's nothing in those words that constitute hate speech.
If you look at what Trustee Del Grande said at the November 7th meeting from 2019 at face value, it's arguable that Del Grande's remarks do not meet the legal definitions of hatred. In fact, Del Grande does say,
Jesus loves all these people. All these poor people are children of God, created in the image of God, and they need to be recognized.
And both Trustee Del Grande and Campaign Life Coalition say they do their work out of love. Josie Lukey says it was out of love that she spoke against pride flags at a Dufferin Peel Catholic School Board meeting in the summer of 2024. May I quote something that you said at the meeting? Okay. This is the quote. "It is because I deeply love those who misguidedly identify as LGBTQ that I so strongly reject the pride flag and the ideology that it propagates." I'd be curious first to hear from you, what ideology does the pride flag propagate in your view?
The celebration of Pride Month, to a lesser extent the pride flag, is about celebrating LGBTQ rights and LGBTQ culture. I believe strongly in human rights for all individuals. I think there's a disagreement about what rights there are.
Josie unequivocally states her belief that pride flags are a symbol for rights that she does not believe in.
I don't believe that there's a right to, for instance, same-sex marriage. So I think the pride flag ideology, again, propagates that there's this idea of the right to same-sex marriage or the right to transition, which I don't believe.
For the record, the legal right to marry someone of the same sex was enacted nationally in 2005. It was seen as a major milestone, marking freedom from discrimination for same-sex couples. And freedom from discrimination is a human right.
The right to transition is not a thing, but the right to be protected from discrimination when accessing public services, that is. And you can't be discriminated against based on your sexual orientation or gender identity. It's in the Ontario Human Rights Code.
You say that you deeply love those who misguidedly identify as LGBTQ. Can you explain what you mean when you say those who misguidedly identify as LGBTQ?
So when I say misguidedly, I don't mean that they don't genuinely experience same-sex attraction or they don't genuinely feel gender dysphoria. When I say misguidedly, I mean that that's how they've chosen to brand themselves.
I think a lot of queer and trans people would say that their gender or sexual identity is about a lot more than just branding themselves. It's about being themselves, and that can come at a heavy cost.
A study published earlier this year in the Canadian Medical Association Journal found that transgender youth are 5 times more likely to think about suicide and 7.6 times more likely to attempt it.
In 2023, a EU-based organization published Trans Murder Monitoring. It found that 321 trans and gender-diverse people were murdered worldwide. Most victims were trans women of color and trans sex workers.
We asked Josie Lutke what she thought about some of the trends revealed by the statistics.
Trans women, especially trans women of color, are harmed in our society at disproportionate rates. A lot of what you're saying today could be construed as a reason to justify violence towards this group of people. How would you respond to that?
I am categorically opposed to violence. I believe everyone should be loved and respected, to treat your neighbor as yourself. So for those who identify as trans women, they are deserving of care and love, and they should not be harmed. So I don't know how much more clear I can make it. If you're thinking about doing that, don't do it. I think we should be able to express our disagreement, to even be able to say, hey, I think what you're doing is wrong. Or, I know that's how you identify. I don't think you're right. And that doesn't lead to hatred. It doesn't lead to disrespect. It doesn't lead to dehumanization at all.
A lot of things come up for me when you talk about like loving people. My mom is very devout, goes to church every Sunday, and we had to work through a lot of what you think is an expression of love. It doesn't feel supportive. What do we mean by love? Can we question what love means on both sides?
Great question. To answer what I believe love is, and I think you're definitely right that sometimes the way we express love is not actually loving. The classic definition of love, at least in Christian circles, is willing the good for one another.
What happens when interpretations of how to treat queer and trans people vary across the Catholic faith?
Well, Charles Lugosi explains that it can result in conflicts, like the one between Mike Del Grande and his fellow trustees that started back in 2019. He says that some Catholic trustees may argue that equitable inclusion for queer and trans people is aligned with Catholic teachings.
They have bought into that philosophy, whereas others, including Mr. Del Grande, are of the view that we also believe in love, but the scripture is very clear that certain conduct is sinful, and we can't approve and implement what we view to be sinful conduct that's contrary to the fundamental teachings of the Catholic Church.
In the end, Toronto Catholic's decision to include protections for queer and trans people in their code of conduct was not unanimous. Is it possible to reconcile 2S LGBTQ+ inclusion with Catholicity?
Well, it depends on your interpretation of Catholic theology. I think that's an internal matter for Catholics to figure out for themselves. Because right at this point, there's no consistency, no uniform position. For people like Mr. Del Grande, I suspect he'd say it's incompatible. For his political opponents on the school board, they'll say, bring it on.
Next time on Queries, we follow Catholic teachers who are on the opposite side from Trustee Del Grande on this theological interpretation.
When that priest gave me a vision of being Catholic that was progressive, that was a lot more open, that changed my life.
But I called the head of the union and I said, listen, this is a situation. I am thinking about getting married. What are the ramifications for me as a gay teacher?
Plus, how the absence of a uniform position on queer and trans inclusion at Toronto Catholic has had significant implications for curriculum.
This feels like it was done almost like secretly. Like, we've been talking all year about Fully Alive is totally transphobic and it's not inclusive. And then before we could see, the board's gone ahead and spent over $100,000 purchasing it.
Queries in Good Faith is hosted and written by me, Tiff Lamb.
And me, Matt Nethersole.
Sound design and editing by me, Tiff Lamb.
Our associate producer is Leticia Dogbe.
Editing and technical support from Matthew O'Mara, with additional help this time from Ryan Hook.
Special thanks to Marina Black. For TVO, Katie O'Connor is the managing editor of podcasts and digital video.
Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital.
John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Theme music by Allison Leighton Brown. Thank you so much for listening.